The Synchromystic presents Synchromystique. Some places, as perhaps some people, seem to possess a certain magnetism. Among the global hotspots exuding such charm are numerous islands in the Mediterranean. One historical reason for this might be the fact that the sea served as a buffer between Christian-dominated Europe and Muslim-controlled North Africa, isolating the islands and their inhabitants in ways promoting eccentricity and uniqueness. This is not even to mention ancient Greece, which, in regions such as Aeolia and Ionia, produced world historic poets such as Hesiod and Homer. As if that weren't significant enough, Miletus also gave birth to Western philosophy, epitomized by such thinkers as Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Leucippus, and, in broader Ionia, Anaxagoras and Pythagoras, to whom we dedicated a previous video. The splendor of the Greco-Roman Empire exudes an undeniable glamour that still reverberates, not only in the region, but to some extent, the world over. Whatever the cause of its enchanting properties, students of the esoteric, not to say the exotic, will find the following locales cropping up repeatedly. Number 10. Sicily. Sicily did, in fact, beget quite an influential pre-Socratic philosopher. Although the name Empedocles may not be as recognizable as some others, the bearer's theory of the four elements, fire, earth, air, and water, influenced ancient cosmogony, Galenic and Islamic medicine, and medieval alchemy, to which we dedicated an entire video. To this day, some people maintain belief in identifiable temperaments based on the derivative concept of the four humors, namely choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic. Humorism notwithstanding, there is a top-of-mind association between Sicily and the mafia. The outfit is so tangled a topic, we'd have to devote an entire presentation to it just to scratch the surface. It has an undeniable association with the island of Sicily, which served as one filming location for Francis Ford Coppola's blockbuster Godfather films. Another curious fact is that Sicily was the birthplace of the 15th century Jewish Christian intriguer born Samuel ben Nissim Bolfarag, but later known as Flavius Mithridates. Flavius's influence is so noteworthy, and his own background so shadowy, that we devoted a portion of our video, 10 Mystery Men, to him. Suffice it here to say that he was one of the principal instigators of the occult current known as Christian Kabbalah, which was most associated with Flavius's illustrious student and possible homosexual lover, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. Not only this, but according to British existentialist and researcher Colin Wilson, Sicily has always had a strong tradition of witchcraft and occultism. Thus, it should hardly surprise us that the later adventurer, reputed gold-creating alchemist, and Freemasonic innovator Giuseppe Balsamo, who styled himself Count Alessandro Cagliostro, would be born in Sicily. We featured Cagliostro at number 10 in our list of all-time most influential occultists, and we talked about him and some of the shadowy figures behind him in 10 Mystery Men. Perhaps Sicily's historic magnetism is one reason why it attracted the 19th to 20th century British occultist Aleister Crowley, who in 1920 founded his Rabelaisian and reportedly black magical drug den and spiritual commune, the Abbey of Thelema, in the northern coastal town of Cefalu. For more on this and other aspects of the life and times of Crowley, once again, see Top 10 Occultists of All Time, but also our videos on Pythagoras and Top 10 Sex Magic Cults. Crowley's 1921 watercolor titled Island of the Magicians appears first of all to be a colorful tribute to himself, but secondarily it underscores the esoteric potency of islands. Number 9. Capri. Speaking of the explosive combo of power and sex, however, once upon a time, the Roman Emperor Tiberius is said to have hosted orgies on the tiny and secluded getaway of Capri. Tiberius's orgies were legendary, but even 19th century German industrialist Friedrich Alfred Krupp appears to have gotten in on some shenanigans, though in Krupp's case, The drives were apparently exclusively of the same-sex-oriented variety. You may recall that Krupp had inherited a steelworks company from his father. Tandem Ventures, providing the raw material for railroad lines and armaments, made Krupp as successful a concern as the American counterpart founded by Andrew Carnegie. The story goes that Krupp was discovered secretly cavorting with Italian male prostitutes because he was closely allied with Kaiser Wilhelm II in Germany. This revelation was initially suppressed. Incredibly, Krupp's wife was even said to have appealed to the Kaiser, and for her troubles ended up locked in an insane asylum. It seems that Krupp decamped for more isolated pastures. In this vein, he indulged his homosexual predilections, which were technically illegal in 19th century Germany, on the island of Capri. For the 20th century science fiction novelist, who is also believed to have set up shop in another far corner of the globe, principally to indulge his sexual appetites, see film critic Rob Ager's video titled The Dark Side of Arthur C. Clarke. Despite Krupp's precaution, by 1902, reports of his indiscretions had been published in several European newspapers. That same year, he died. There are conflicting reports. Some say that, ostensibly feeling the strain of the scandal, he collapsed into illness. Others maintain that he took his own life. Speaking of Capri, there's also the case of Vladimir Ulanov, better known as Vladimir Lenin. We wonder what on earth he was doing playing chess on the island, as depicted in one rare photograph. Given what we now know about the island's, checkered history, it does make you wonder. Especially given the fact that some doctors suggested that the communist frontman lived out his last brain-rattled days suffering from terminal neurosyphilis. That was certainly a well-guarded secret in Soviet-era Russia. For the strange cross-currents of Soviet communism and sexual license, and even Eastern Tantrism, see our videos, 10 Sex Magic Cults, and 10 occultists who were accused spies. Nowadays, our island's name is prominently associated with a powerhouse gambling franchise founded by the late riverboat gambling mogul Bernard "Bernie" Goldstein. Numerous casinos nationwide are wholly owned by his company, which calls itself the Isle of Capri. Of course, various sexcapades have by no means been restricted to the Mediterranean. When lurid revelations were widely publicized about the sexual perversions of now disgraced and deceased American financier Jeffrey Epstein, one of the principal news items concerned his private island in the Caribbean Sea. Known as Little St. James, it's part of the chain known as the U.S. Virgin Islands. According to a recent NBC News item, megabank J.P. Morgan Chase claims that the wife of a former governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands aided convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's alleged criminal activity by helping him to dodge sex offender monitoring laws, as well as coordinating visas, employment, and travel for his victims. Though we might take some of this cum grano salis, and as usual there's more to the story. Not least the fact that the bank's allegations are merely a countercharge in reply to the Virgin Islands' own allegation that the bank itself was indispensable to the operation and concealment of the Epstein trafficking enterprise. We shouldn't forget that Epstein's private Caribbean island features a building that resembles a religious temple, though it's unclear what it's used for. Number 8. Skorpios. This isn't the place to plumb the sort of depths of the goings-on with Epstein. We'll content ourselves with the following superficial observation. Epstein, whom we mentioned in Top 10 Sex Magic Cults, was far from the only noteworthy private island owner. Before Little St. James, there was the island of Skorpios. Skorpios is primarily known as the private island of the late Greek shipping billionaire Aristotle Onassis. Purchased the year President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Skorpios was also the site of his wedding to former U.S. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy on October the 20th, 1968. Of course, these Kennedy connections are integral to understanding cryptopolitics, if the mysterious gemstone file is to be believed at any rate. According to the late California-based radio host and conspiracy theorist Mae Brussel, the gemstone file represented years of research by an otherwise unknown inventor named Bruce Porter Roberts. In Roberts' conception, Aristotle Onassis was a James Bond villain-level criminal mastermind. The sweeping narrative has it that Onassis allied himself with American investor and business owner Joseph P. Kennedy. Along with the Mafia and various other players, Onassis and Kennedy arranged for the election of JFK over Richard Nixon, in what is still remembered as one of the closest presidential contests in United States history. At some point, however, Jack Kennedy and his brother Bobby tried to double-cross the Greek shipping magnate. Either that, or else they attempted to break free from his influence. Regardless, according to the gemstone hypothesis, Onassis orchestrated the murders of both men. For more on JFK's assassination, see our previous video. In other striking episodes, the gemstone file also posits that early in 1957, Aristotle Onassis had Howard Hughes kidnapped from his Beverly Hills hotel bungalow. It supposes that Hughes suffered a massive brain injury during the forcible kidnapping, and that Hughes was subsequently a virtual prisoner of Onassis on Skorpios, and injected regularly with morphine, while Onassis took over the operation of Hughes's considerable financial affairs, including airlines and U.S. defense contracting. These possibilities faintly echo a few little-known Greek variations on the theme of global Masonic conspiracies. We hope to outline some of the main lines of these speculations in a forthcoming video. For another mention of Howard Hughes, however, and how he may or may not have figured in the life and death of Caltech engineer Jack Parsons, see 10 Occultist Spies. Runner-up, Fraxas. At this point, I can't help throwing in a fictional island, for on the odd and even quasi-magical waves we've been surfing, of some interest is the movie The Magus, adapted from the 1965 novel by John Fowles. It stars Candice Bergen, Michael Caine, and Anthony Quinn, which latter actor we mentioned in our wide-ranging symbol investigation January the 6th. The Magus was set on a fictional Greek island called Phraxos, where a mysterious millionaire, played by Quinn, is engaging in what can only be called diabolist cultic activities. However, the real-life inspiration for Phraxos was the Greek island of Spetses. A key point is that the flick attracted some speculation back in the day as to whether it was hinting of actual VIP personalities engaging in bona fide Satanism. In that respect, The Magus prefigured Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut in 1999, which we briefly touched on in Top 10 Sex Magic Cults. Some have discovered in the famed late director's final film Illuminist themes, and have drawn comparisons to various elite masquerades, such as the Rothschilds' Surrealist Ball, or the annual gala that has been hosted by the Metropolitan Museum of Art since the 1940s. But let's shift gears slightly. Number 7. Corsica. Above, we noted the Sicilian mob, but of course there's also the Corsican variety, and the island of Corsica has been associated with more than a few odd characters, some of world historic import, such as one Napoleon Bonaparte, born there in 1769. His father had fought for Corsican independence, first from Genoa and later from France. Of course, the son, the military genius Napoleon, who would eventually proclaim himself French emperor, was a figure of controversy. If he inherited this mojo from the island, he wasn't alone. Both in Sex Magic Cults and in Top 10 Mystery Men, we introduced viewers to Rabbi Chaim Falk, better known as the Baal Shem of London. According to 20th century historian Cecil Roth, he, that is Falk, had a private synagogue in his house in Well Close Square, and he also established a laboratory on London Bridge, where he carried out alchemical experiments which aroused some notice. He may even have been attempting to manufacture a mannequin creature called a golem using Kabbalistic magic. Among those who were attracted to Falk was the international adventurer Theodore de Stein, who claimed to be king of Corsica and hoped to obtain, through Falk's alchemical experiments, sufficient gold to enable him to regain his throne. For more on these Kabbalistic hermetic currents, see Top 10 Gold-Making Alchemists. British occultist and surrealist painter Ethel Colquhoun spent time in Corsica. Her 1939 painting Tepid Waters features a building patterned on a Corsican church. Speaking of churches, Corsica was also briefly associated with the curious 19th to 20th century so-called wandering bishop Paolo Miralia Gelati. This strange class of bishops deserves its own study and has been associated with numerous heterodox individuals, such as Jean Labarre and, by extension, Luc Jouret, the founder of the ill-fated so-called Order of the Solar Temple. Solar Temple ritualism springs from Crowleyan occultism and Masonic Templarism. These wandering bishops are frequently involved with esoteric streams, such as Theosophy, a movement we define in 10 arcane words, principally associated with Helena Blavatsky, whom we profiled in Top 10 Occultists of All Time. Theosophy also involved Charles Webster Leadbetter and James Ingal Wedgwood, both founders of a supposed liberal Catholic Church. Wedgwood met a similar end as that which we attributed to V.I. Lenin, namely dementia due to sexually contracted tertiary syphilis. Incidentally, Moralia had previously served the Catholic Church as a priest on the island of Sicily before being excommunicated. He seems to have been connected to Joseph René Villot. One curious synchronicity of note, or lexilink, is that one of the political divisions within Corsica itself is termed Casanova. Of course, this is also the name of the 18th century Venetian adventurer Giacomo Casanova. Although today he is remembered principally for his womanizing, he was also an occultist with reputed ties both to Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. Number 6. Crete. Another Mediterranean locale figures prominently in the legend of Atlantis. One retelling of the story comes from the towering 5th century BC philosopher Plato. In his cosmologically themed dialogue, Timaeus, Plato describes the lost utopia of Atlantis as having been founded by demigods as a model of military prowess and ideal government. Plato reports the information as an exchange between Socrates and Critias, but he also alleges that Critias' source was the revered Athenian lawmaker Solon. The Cretan connection revolves around a Bronze Age civilization located in the Aegean Sea. During the rule of the 4th dynasty in Egypt, around 2500 BC, a commercial empire dominated trade throughout the Mediterranean basin. On Crete and other islands, the people of this empire used their amassed wealth to build huge multi-story temples, to create large cities, and to lay out complex waterworks. By Plato's time, the civilization had disappeared, but in 1900, Sir Arthur Evans unearthed the stunning remains of what may have been Europe's first civilization. He called it Minoan, after the legendary King Minos. One K.T. Frost is noteworthy for his letter to the editor of December 2, 1909, printed in the Times of London. In that place, he outlined various parallels between the Minoan discoveries and fabled Atlantis. The article was subsequently republished as The Lost Continent and reproduced as an appendix in the Atlantis story. Margaret Murray, whom we will get into further when we discuss Minorca, connected the Minotaur of Crete with what is now routinely termed the Wiccan horned god. The horned god is sometimes described as the consort of the triple goddess, often identified as Hecate or Diana. The Cretan monster, half man, half bull, was confined to a subterranean labyrinth. Its spiraling paths have numerous symbolic interpretations, including the journey of the soul to enlightenment or to salvation. And the general theme has inspired many films, including Christopher Nolan's Inception, which has several allusions to the Cretan myth. According to some analysts, when Ulysses, also known as Odysseus, returned to Crete after his epic Odyssey, he landed, in Homer's words, on a luxuriant island home to innumerable goats. British explorer-historian Timothy "Tim" Severin regarded this as a reference to Crete, a place long associated with goats. The mythology ramifies when we realize that Crete's Mount Ida is believed by some to have been the birthplace of the Greek deity Zeus. Zeus's mother, Rhea, supposedly hid him in one of Ida's caves to prevent him from being eaten by Cronus. Traditionally, the 8th century BC Greek seer and poet Epimenides was believed to have been from Knossos. Given this place of origin, his provocative statement that Cretans are always liars is routinely termed Epimenides' paradox. Perhaps these mythical and even irrational tendencies are what drew to the island the 1st century Neo-Pythagorean and supposed wonder worker Apollonius of Tyana. According to the 3rd century biographer, the Athenian sophist Philostratus, Apollonius didn't die, but rather disappeared mysteriously in the temple of the goddess Dictina in Crete, and was never heard from again. Since 1828, a ghost army supposedly makes yearly appearances outside the Cretan castle at Frangocastella. The phantasms are said to be the otherworldly remains of some several hundred Greeks who were massacred trying to secure independence from the Ottoman Empire. According to Elizabeth Clare and Mark Prophet, founders of the New Age Church Universal and Triumphant, an enlightened entity known as the Ascended Master Hilarion has an etheric temple of truth situated over the island of Crete. Number 5. Lesbos. Lesbos is another island with a history that extends back to the Stone Age. The island is honeycombed with vast cave complexes that archaeologists hypothesize may have functioned as the setting for Neolithic religious ceremonies. Among the most impressive and massive are those at Megaras and St. Bartholomew Caves. The island also features an ancient theater that was one of the largest in the Hellenistic world. This suggests a literary connection, further emphasized by the fact that Lesbos is known as the island of the poets. The standout, of course, was Thales of Miletus's near contemporary, Sappho. Sappho lived between the 7th and 6th centuries BC. She had a towering reputation as a lyricist that has persisted through the ages. Sappho was lavished with titles such as the 10th Muse, though sadly very few of her works are extant, and what is available is generally fragmentary. The exception is her Ode to Aphrodite, that scholars widely consider to be complete. Still, it is likely that the singular fact about Sappho is her reputed homosexuality. This is evident in the 2 English words, lesbian and sapphic, that harken back to her, or to her place of birth directly. Admittedly, academics are divided over the question of whether these associations are justified. According to one legend, Sappho killed herself by leaping from the Leucadian cliffs due to her love for the ferryman Phaon. Lord Byron's admiration for Sappho and the Lesbos connection might reflect rumored personal predilections, but seems quite tame today. The Isles of Greece, the Isles of Greece, where burning Sappho loved and sung, where grew the arts of war and peace, where Delos rose and Phoebus sprung. Eternal summer gilds them yet, but all except their sun is set. In any event, it's hard to beat Byron's attempt to raise British support for his personal crusade, which eventually killed him, to secure freedom for modern Greece from the Turks. Number 4. Majorca. Majorca is another place of high strangeness. For instance, there's the probably fictitious Pelagius of Majorca. We got into him and his alleged mentorship of the equally curious 15th to 16th century German Benedictine monk and occultist Johannes Trithemius in our video, 10 Mystery Men. In that place, we observe that Trithemius, himself the teacher of such notables as the Renaissance magician Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, claimed to have apprenticed to a hermit on the island of Majorca. In the 16th century, Agrippa became an archivist for the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, also known as King Charles I of Spain. The Habsburg monarch's sphere of influence included Majorca. The same island was also, and previously, the origin point for the indisputably real Raymond Lull. Lull's wealthy family had come to Majorca along with Aragonese King James I, who routed the Saracens around the year 1231. Frances Yates highlighted Lull as her first entry in her important book on occultism in Elizabethan England. The mystique of the island hasn't exactly waned. The actor known as Nicolas Cage, but who was born Nicholas Coppola, had a 2022 flick, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, set in Majorca. Number 3. Ibiza and Menorca. And then there's Minorca, the smaller version of Majorca, both of which are part of the Balearic island chain, as is Ibiza, which, by the way, was casually mentioned in Christopher Nolan's synchromystically interesting Dark Knight Rises flick. Not only is Ibiza a hideaway for the rich and famous, it's also attracted its share of oddball esoterics. Consider, for instance, the Canadian-born businessman Alan Robert Krakauer. After an unspecified mystical experience circa 1987, he changed his name to Ra Uru Hu and moved to Ibiza. There, taking a page out of, or putting a page into, the transhumanist playbook, he created something called the Human Design System, which seems to be about unlocking this supposed hidden potential within our genetic code. There's also the fact that Ibiza has the tiny island Esvedra off of its coast. Among other legends, this area is supposed to have a scientifically inexplicable magnetism. Perhaps this is to be expected, since it is also reputed to be the abode of the Carthaginian moon and sex goddess Tenit, a counterpart to Astarte. As if that weren't all, the island is said to be home to sirens and sea nymphs, who tried to lure Odysseus from his ship in Homer's Odyssey. In any case, this is the mythologically saturated backdrop that seems to have drawn anthropologist and folklorist Margaret Murray to the area, though Murray focused her attention on the northeastern island of Minorca, where she investigated the material for her controversial 1921 book, The Witch Cult in Western Europe. As mentioned in Top 10 Occultists of All Time, under our entry for Gerald Gardner, Murray's book was hugely influential on this seminal Wiccan. This is to say that Gardner leveraged Murray's ideas and blended them with OTO occultism and the idiosyncratic views of Aleister Crowleyanity, to sketch the outlines of what has become known as the religion of Wicca. Admittedly, Gardner himself claimed to have been initiated by an obscure alleged witch who he referred to as Old Dorothy. For more, see Top 10 Occultists. But, well, before Murray made her way there, we find another curious figure, the 18th century British Army General Charles Rainsford. At one time, Rainsford had been a person of some authority in the Tower of London, which is the symbolical equivalent of dynamite, as we hope to explore in a future video. Eventually, Rainsford made his way to Minorca. What's especially interesting is that the general is remembered for his personal interests in alchemy and Freemasonry. We got into the former discipline in our presentation, Top 10 Gold-Making Alchemists. Rainsford appears to have been a link between England and French occultists, including both the Illuminés of Avignon and members of the Loge de Philalethes, both of which appear to have been inspired by Martinez de Pascali's Order of Elus Coens, that is, elect priests. In his capacity as esoteric liaison, General Rainsford maintained ties to, or at least information on, a coterie of sex-obsessed Kabbalists and mystics, including Emanuel Swedenborg, whom we discussed in 10 Sex Magic Cults, as well as the Baal Shem of London, the rabbi mentioned above, whom we profiled in greater depth in 10 Mystery Men. Number 2. Monte Cristo. Best known for being a possible real-life version of what Robert Louis Stevenson termed a treasure island, this out-of-the-way destination was really put on the proverbial map by, of course, the celebrated, constantly retold, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Père. In the 2002 adaptation, the hero, Edmond Dantes, played by Jim Caviezel, is wrongly imprisoned. He escapes and locates a hidden treasure on Monte Cristo, which he is able to use to carry out a complicated revenge scheme. Dumas himself modeled his fiction on actual events that had taken place on the Italian mainland, but according to researchers Stephen Klimchuk and Gerald Warner, writing in their Secret Places, Hidden Sanctuaries of 2009, the underlying theme of buried riches on Monte Cristo may not simply be legendary. Their speculations turn on the adventures of a notorious Turkish pirate named Dragut, or Turgut. Dragut trained under the Ottoman Admiral Barbarossa, who had been born on the island of Lesbos, of all places. Abbreviating their action-packed careers, we content ourselves to say that the duo terrorized the Mediterranean. Effectively, they gave the Ottoman Empire complete mastery over that sea. Along the way, they secured for themselves enough booty to make them perhaps the richest men in Europe and Asia Minor. Or, as the authors remark, in modern terms, they were billionaires. The key point is that Dragut was known to have frequented Monte Cristo, which, after he destroyed the Camaldolese monastery and sold its monks into slavery, was desolate and hard to reach. Klimchuk and Warner relate that two wealthy Italians, Cosimo I de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, and Alessandro Appiani, Lord of Piombino, undertook costly treasure-hunting expeditions on the island. Both men were near contemporaries of Dragut, and, as noblemen with military connections, were likely to have had reliable intelligence on the activities of their Ottoman adversary. We have no word, however, on whether any pirate treasure was ever recovered. But if you have any notion of locating it yourself, know this. The entire island is jealously guarded by an Italian government exclusion zone. Apart from a handful of meticulously vetted naturalists and a small contingent of patrolmen, no one is allowed to set foot on Monte Cristo. Even fishing in nearby waters is strictly prohibited. So unless you're friends with Tom Cruise and Ving Rhames, you may as well forget about it. Oh, one more thing. Dragut himself finally met his end during the Great Siege of our last hotspot. Number 1. Malta. Malta is, without a doubt, one of the most interesting of the myriad crypto nodes in the Mediterranean. Its aura may extend back to the border of history and prehistory. I'm thinking, of course, of the island's megalithic temples. Before the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, these Maltese structures had been claimed as the oldest surviving temples in the world. In fact, the editors of Time Life's Mystery of the Unknown series considered the 3 Stone Age temples near Valletta to be among Europe's premier points of energy. They hypothesized that this ancient Maltese religion, which had disappeared by the Bronze Age, involved veneration of an Earth Mother goddess. This probably explains why the previously mentioned Margaret Murray also spent time in Malta. Malta's locals also have an apparent obsession with the evil eye. Word is, they go so far as to paint protective symbols on boats and on cars. Cagliostro, the Sicilian-born 18th century adventurer and supposed magician mentioned earlier, was no stranger to curses, if surviving stories are to be believed at any rate. It hardly seems coincidental then that he claimed to have apprenticed in the hermetic arts on Malta. Cagliostro claimed to have studied under the mysterious Altotas, whom we covered in 10 Mystery Men. For more on Count Cagliostro, who figures in Marvel comic lore, see our videos, Top 10 Occultists, and 10 Gold-Making Alchemists. Malta also served as the latest haunt for one of the oldest military religious orders in the world. These medieval crusaders, originally christened Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, were otherwise known as the Knights Hospitaller. We won't try to excavate the complicated history of the Crusades during the Middle Ages here. Suffice it to say that after the fall of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Knights of St. John were confined to the county of Tripoli, and when Acre was captured in 1291, the order sought refuge in the Kingdom of Cyprus. Shortly, however, the Knights were dissatisfied with the local political infighting on Cyprus, and they decamped for Rhodes, where they became known as the Knights of Rhodes. Of course, we note that the name Rhodes occurs in another connection with several New World Order conspiracy theories. For example, the name is attached to the 19th century British mining tycoon Cecil Rhodes and his Rhodes Scholarship, a scholarship which has been associated with such power players as William Jefferson Blythe III, better known as Bill Clinton, the 42nd U.S. President. For his part, Cecil Rhodes never married, leading to allegations that he might have, well, let's say, fit in with Lord Byron and Friedrich Krupp. Late in his life, however, Cecil Rhodes was relentlessly romantically pursued by Polish-Russian princess Catherine Radziwill. Rhodes repeatedly rebuffed her advances, and the duo eventually ended up in court. The princess was, however, related to Polish diplomat and prince Stanislaw Albrecht Radziwill, who, several decades later, of course, in 1959, married Jackie Kennedy's younger sister Carolyn Lee Bouvier. Which leads me to a sidelight concerning the Amalfi Coast. We may as well take this slight detour through the paradisical Amalfi. not least because Jacqueline Kennedy and sister Lee Radziwill had a high-profile photo shoot there in 1962. Though not an island itself, of course, though the celebrated and previously mentioned Isle of Capri is only a short sea trip off the southern tip, Amalfi is an exquisite destination that is both frequently compared to the French Riviera and is also a favorite of Tinseltown, for there have been a number of exceptional films set there, such as the knockout brilliant A Good Woman from 2004, based on Oscar Wilde's 1892 classic play Lady Windermere's Fan. The movie starred Scarlett Johansson, Helen Hunt, and the much-admired Tom Wilkinson. As film aficionados already know, Wilkinson was also superb as General Cornwallis in Mel Gibson's The Patriot from the year 2000, also featuring the ill-fated Dark Knight actor Heath Ledger. In any case, in A Good Woman, the background shots of the luxurious Amalfi setting provide viewers with languid eye candy that is a welcome diversion from the apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic themes that seem to dominate the imaginations of Hollywood's mythmakers nowadays. Whether this single-mindedness is a function of or results in so-called predictive programming, I'll leave for further explorations. In any event, the previously named movie is quite a change from the violent era of espionage, murder, and even lycanthropy recognized as far away as England and depicted in John Webster's Duchess of Malfi. Published in 1612, it is praised by popular outlets as among the greatest tragedies of English Renaissance drama. Amalfi also has special significance for the polyonymous military order we have been investigating, for according to some reports, in their earliest incarnation as the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, they were supposedly founded where else but in the city of Amalfi in the Kingdom of Naples in the year 1048. Small world. We register awareness that other sources merely say that the knights were founded by Amalfi merchants in Jerusalem. Still later in the 16th century, the Knights of Rhodes were displaced again, this time by Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. However, then Pope Clement VII bargained with Holy Roman Emperor Charles V to provide the knights with, if not their final headquarters, at least their most recent, namely Malta. According to one story, Cagliostro was personally acquainted with Manuel Pinto de Fonseca, 68th Grand Master of the Knights of Malta. Incidentally, these Catholic Knights of Malta should not be confused with the Order of Malta, which is a Freemasonic degree awarded within the York Rite, nor should it be conflated with a Protestant branch of the order that first arose in Germany and other places. You'll recall that, as a result of the Reformation, numerous European princes and rulers withdrew their allegiance from the Pope. In place of Catholicism, many embraced Lutheran or Calvinist or Anglican forms of Christianity. Frequently, they didn't necessarily want to give up the rights, appurtenances, and prestige associated with being a Knight of Malta. Thus, nobles in some Maltese commanderies, that is, local bodies of knights, simply began referring to themselves as Protestant Knights. In 1870, this version of the order was introduced into the United States after receiving a charter from the Scottish Commandery. According to Michael Bajan, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln, writing in The Messianic Legacy, a follow-up volume to their popular Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the shadowy and probably fictional Priory of Sion had an ongoing beef with the sovereign military order of Malta. In any event, the deal brokered by Pope Clement VII concerning the bona fide Catholic Knights of Malta was the origin of the annual tribute of the Maltese Falcon. Preceding facts notwithstanding, the Knights of Malta have not maintained uninterrupted control of the island. Malta changed hands several times with noteworthy mentions for the pervasive Napoleon Bonaparte, as well as for the British Crown. Perhaps this usurpation carried with it some sort of curse. Napoleon, after all, was eventually defeated by the English Duke of Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, and among the British officers stationed in Malta was archaeologist and cartographer Percy Harrison Fawcett. Fawcett would later disappear in 1925 during an expedition to find an ancient lost city which he and others believed existed in the Amazon rainforest. Nevertheless, on the strength of several treaties and agreements, the Knights currently occupy historic properties at St. John's Cavalier, Casa Lanfreducci, and the spectacular Fort Sant'Angelo. Despite their charged history with Muslims, the Knights of Malta are said presently to enjoy good relations with Islamic countries. This is partly due to their charitable efforts. For example, they run a hospital in Palestine, recognizable by its distinctive flag. By the way, the Maltese cross was imbued with symbolic importance by 19th to 20th century Austrian neo-paganist forerunner Guido von List in his esoteric system, which he called Armanism. Stay tuned for a future exploration we're tentatively titling 10 Nazi Occultists. Malta's allure has not gone unnoticed in popular culture either. The island was recently featured as the setting for the 2022 installment of the Jurassic Park franchise, titled Jurassic World Dominion. The island's appeal is arguably nothing new. Academy Award-winning actor Sir Alec Guinness was cast as Lieutenant Peter Ross in the 1953 British war flick The Malta Story. The film depicts yet another siege of Malta, this one occurring during World War II. Much more significant cinematically, though set in San Francisco and not Malta, is John Huston's 1941 film noir classic The Maltese Falcon. Starring Humphrey Bogart, Mary Astor, Peter Lorre, and Sidney Greenstreet. The film's introductory screens explain that in 1539, a golden falcon, intended for Charles V, was stolen by pirates. Current whereabouts unknown. This mystery launches the plot. Finally, on the contemporary scene, and in a darker vein, there's also a yearly Gothic-themed heavy metal concert apparently hosted in and themed around Malta. The Mediterranean is a sometimes strange and mystically suffused area, and we haven't even considered some of the potent characters to have associations, even if tenuous, with the area. For example, there's Prester John, a supposedly Christian king whose dominion was, eventually, believed to be located somewhere between the Mediterranean and Africa's Mountains of the Moon, then thought to be the source of the Nile. We hope to get into these sorts of legendary figures in an upcoming video. Finally, we should at least mention those all-but islands in the Halkidiki Peninsula of northeast Greece. In particular, we draw viewers' attention to Mount Athos, colloquially referred to as the Monks' Republic. The autonomous, monastic republic of Holy Mount Athos is located in modern Greece, representing the southern tips of Macedonia. One characteristic, if politically incorrect, feature of the community is that women are not permitted. In fact, in 2016, during a visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin, the British Broadcasting Corporation reported that a 10th century charter states that even female animals are excluded. This policy is explained, though in some minds perhaps not justified, by observing that the entire place is, in effect, an open-air monastery of religious brothers. Similarly to Monte Cristo, Mount Athos is accessible only by boat, and through rough and dangerous waters no less. That hasn't stopped various celebrity visitors from frequenting the peninsula. This includes dignitaries such as those from the House of Windsor, both then Prince Charles and, before his death, Prince Philip. The Duke of Edinburgh have made a significant number of very low-profile visits and retreats to the Holy Mountain. According to the British newspaper The Guardian, now King Charles's visits have been shrouded in secrecy. Countless Greeks with access to the community told The Guardian that they were under oath never to mention them. Charles's interest in the Holy Mount has given rise to speculations that he has surreptitiously converted to Eastern Orthodoxy. One Athonite monk proclaimed, quote, "There is no question that the British royal is Orthodox in his heart." We are reminded that Prince Philip, Charles's Corfu-born father, had to switch to Anglicanism from Greek Orthodoxy in order to marry the late Queen Elizabeth II. Regardless, the Guardian article goes on to report that, quote, "Not since the Stuarts has an heir to the throne taken such an intellectual interest in religion." The author added that Charles, who assumed the title Defender of the Faith when he became king, has displayed an unprecedented interest in denominations as divergent as Islam and Buddhism. Though, to be strictly accurate, it seems that King Charles wishes to be known as Defender of Faith, rather than Defender of the Faith. The idea seems to be a de-emphasis on Anglicanism, And perhaps on Christianity? As we noted in our Coronation Stone video, King Charles has a fascination with Transylvania. That country, of course, is connected to the Dracula lore popularized in 1897 by Irish-born Gothic horror novelist Abraham Bram Stoker, but which goes back to Wallachian ruler Vlad the Impaler, otherwise known as Vlad Dracula. Of course, Francis Ford Coppola made a movie version in 1992 with an all-star cast including Anthony Hopkins, Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, and Gary Oldman in the titular role. By the way, Dracula reportedly translates to Son of the Dragon or Son of the Devil. We'll have to leave a deeper dive into this evidently cursed genealogy for another day.